Chapter 317. The Enslaved Bride, Part 14. The police surprised Bint al-Zubayr at her residence and arrested her. When they searched her house, they found Olivia in one of the rooms, her hands and feet tied up. At the police station Bint al-Zubayr was interrogated, and the truth was extracted from her by force. The police inspector who interviewed her, forced her to sign her confession. Malwal was called to the police station, and when he saw Olivia, he could not believe his eyes. He decided that as soon as the police allowed Olivia to leave, he would take her directly to the railway station and flee from that accursed society. He was scared to spend even one more day in that jungle of wild beasts. Malwal doubted the innocence of Ikhlas, and had begun to think of her as a professional paid prostitute, who would do anything for money like the southerner, Abdullah Deng, owned. Moreover, he thought that she was employed by Bint al-Zubayr to trap Mu'alina and that later on the corrupt woman would use Ikhlas' adulterous act with the imam to blackmail him. Why should he and his wife involve themselves in such a dirty game? That was the way Malwal's agitated and confused mind interpreted the recent confession of Ikhlas. Nevertheless, Olivia stood firmly against his conclusion. She refused to believe that Ikhlas was a professional paid prostitute. She argued that Ikhlas' innocence was written all over her face. Somehow she had been dragged, against her wishes, into that debased life. Consequently, Olivia told Malwal that until the trial was over, and everything had become exposed, they should not leave the city. Malwal, against his wish, succumbed to the pressure of his wife and stayed with her. By the third day of the trial, not only Malwal, but many other people, came to share the same conclusion and began to see Ikhlas as a filthy prostitute. When Bint al-Zubayr was escorted into the courtroom by 4 police officers, many people were happy to see her. They had heard a great deal about her, but few had seen her before that day. Her name and infamy could be compared to none other than her great-grandfather, al-Zubayr Basha himself. When she entered the room, surrounded by the police, she looked like a huge elephant accompanied by a group of little monkeys. No chair could be found in the courtroom that was wide enough to contain her huge body. The court authority ordered 10 men to vacate their bench to accommodate the mass of the woman. When she sat down, the judge and the audience waited for a while, to see whether the bench would continue to hold up under such a heavy weight without breaking or cracking. Then the judge ordered the police inspector who had interrogated her to recite her confession to the court. The details were summarized as follows. Bint al-Zubayr admitted her involvement in the drama of Abdullah Deng and his so-called daughter Ikhlas. She explained the reason for creating such a drama and sending Ikhlas and Abdullah Deng to act it out to Mu'alina. She said she had been born and raised in a good Muslim home. Her family members were well known, because they were all the descendants of the great Sudanese hero al-Zubayr Basha. Her tragedy began when she fell in love with her neighbor at the age of 17. Before her neighbor approached her family and asked for her hand, he impregnated her. The boy changed his mind later on and refused to marry her. His main reason was that because she allowed him to sleep with her before marriage, he could not trust her anymore. Her mother discovered the pregnancy and went to the boy's family and complained about what he had done to her daughter. The boy denied his involvement in the affair. The mother beat her daughter and threatened to inform her husband. Bint al-Zubayr knew that if her father found out about her pregnancy, he would not hesitate to kill her. Wherefore, she was forced to choose between running away from home and becoming a prostitute, or committing suicide. Of course, being alive until the trial, she had chosen to run away from home and become a prostitute. And this was the story in a nutshell. But, the story as narrated by Bint al-Zubayr was very long and embellished with many colorful details. While the police inspector stood reading those lengthy details, the judge often interrupted him, asking him to avoid unnecessary and immoral details. Every time, the judge also wanted to know how those details related to the drama of Abdullah Deng and his daughter. In that way the police inspector skipped many details until he reached the link. The link did not become clear, until it was revealed at the very end that the neighbor, who had impregnated Bint al-Zubayr and destroyed her life, sending her into prostitution, was none other than the blessed Imam of the Grand Mosque, Maulana Abdul Razik. The shocking news hit Maulana like a bullet fired at close range. He was startled, as if he had seen a zombie emerging from her grave to assault him. He jumped out of his chair and screamed. His reaction scared Bint al-Zubayr so much that she jumped up and landed again on her bench. Her action added more weight to the bench, causing it to break. The woman fell backward like an old building hit by a tornado. Her massive body fell on some people sitting immediately behind her. They were crushed beneath the heavy weight of the frightened woman. Some of those victims were carried out of the courtroom never to be seen again. It took 10 men to restore the fallen woman to her previous position. The audience stood on their feet until everything was restored to normal. When the judge became sure that Maulana had not suffered a heart attack and Bint al-Zubayr had not broken her neck, he asked Ikhlas' lawyer to commence his defense. Mr. Akal was still stunned by the news. He stood silently, never shifting his gaze from Maulana's face. It was the judge who requested him to stop looking at Maulana and start his defense. When he heard the judge, he was finally able to shake himself out of the catatonic rage that had seized him from the moment he heard the shocking news. So I am right in my guess. This man is a fox, and I knew it from the time I saw his long beard, said Mr. Akal while his voice choked with anger. I will disqualify you as a defense lawyer if you make such a remark about the accused again, shouted the judge. He was furious as well. Mr. Akal felt frustrated by the warning. He became even more upset. I will go directly to my defense. As we just discovered today, my client Ikhlas was dragged, without her knowledge or consent, into the revenge plot between a lover and his beloved. She had no clue why she was sent to Maulana's house and made to act in that drama of Mr. Abdullah Deng and his daughter. They performed well and Maulana fell into the trap of Bint al-Zubayr. Now I want to take the court back to the life of Ikhlas before she fell into the hands of Bint al-Zubayr. Ikhlas was not a prostitute, as some of you might have thought. She was from a good family and a good home. She was a married bride, who was about to fly to her husband in the United States of America, before the Arab Janjaweed raided her village and killed her parents, her 2 brothers, and her baby sister. In an instant Maulana bolted out of his seat and stood, eyes wide open, staring at Mr. Akal. He opened his mouth to cry out in triumph but found he could only croak out the words, "This girl is my missing bride and I am her husband." Maulana wiped perspiration from his forehead with one shaking hand. Some in the audience were looking puzzled by Maulana's actions. My client's name was, before Mr. Akal could reveal Ikhlas's real name, Maulana shouted, Ayan Majok and her husband is Maulana. Now every pair of eyes shifted from Mr. Akal's face to the young southerner who stood and shouted the former name of Ikhlas and her husband. Mr. Akal remained motionless for a few seconds, when he heard someone say the previous name of Ikhlas before he had time to say it. Then he turned in slow motion and looked open-mouthed at Maulana. Yes, sir, I am the husband whose name you are about to mention, said Maulana, facing Mr. Akal. Tears filled Maulana's eyes and his throat nearly closed. He fell on his chair, covered his face with his hands, and began to weep. He could not listen to any more of what Mr. Akal was saying about him and his missing bride. Olivia helped him to his feet, and followed the order of the judge, to take him out of the courtroom. Some people thought Maulana had lost his senses. Even Ayan could not confirm his claim immediately, due to the shock. She could not believe that her husband Maulana would suddenly appear out of the blue and become the man sitting with his wife, Olivia, in the courtroom. Her confused and disturbed mind needed time to sort out what had just happened. Only Olivia could grasp who Maulana had just claimed to be. She was at once confronted with a new dilemma: who was the true bride of Maulana? Maulana had come all the way from America to find his bride, Ayan. He had placed his life in much danger because of her. Olivia had thought of herself as just a friend who had offered to help him finding his missing bride. She had fallen in love with him, and he had not stopped her. She had not stopped him from searching for his bride. Malwell had finally lost hope in finding his bride, and found no one else to replace her except Olivia. Suddenly now, things were different. Malwell would not have married Olivia if he had found Ian. Olivia's memory took her back to the day she had approached Malwell, in that desolate village, and expressed her feeling towards him. Malwell had confronted her with his promise to keep his marriage vow to Ian, and she had agreed to honor those vows. Whose marriage vow was valid now, and whose marriage vow did Malwell have to honor? Olivia bit her lips to control the emotions creating upheaval inside her mind. With difficulty, she was able to pull herself together and pretend to be calm. Malwell also overcame his shock, and requested Olivia to lead him back to the courtroom. He promised to control himself until the trial was over. By the time Malwell and Olivia returned to the courtroom, Mr. Akal had reached the end of the unpleasant encounter between the Janjaweed and Wadmira. The audience and the judge sat spellbound, listening to his narration, as if they were watching a horror movie. Wadmira killed the wicked Janjaweed and took Ian and the other Dinka girls captive, along with the cattle they had stolen from the south. My client's fate moved her from the hands of notorious men into the grasp of an even more evil and dangerous man. That same wicked, lawless, and bloodthirsty man brought Ian to Bit al-Zabir, and sold her as a slave. That same night, Ian was chained, beaten, raped, and her body was burnt with a hot nail, as a mark of slavery. The wicked woman, who sat in this hall, used a hot rod to mark the private parts of the girls who were sold to her by Wadmira and other Janjaweed, which was exactly what her wicked great-grandfather, Al-Zabir Basha, the so-called hero of Sudan, used to do to our ancestors, in the past. Mr. Akal expected the judge or one of the other listeners to challenge him on his views about Al-Zabir Basha. When no one voiced an objection, he continued his narration. In less than a month, my client Ikalas was raped by more than 300 men. Moreover, she told me that in her first week, she was forced to sleep with more than 50 men in a day. Mr. Akal exaggerated in his figures with the intention of increasing the wrath of the judge, the jury, and maybe even the audience, so that Bit al-Zabir would either be hung or given a maximum term in prison. For that reason, my client was driven to the point of contemplating suicide. After she tortured Ian mentally and physically, Bit al-Zabir came up with the drama of Abdullah Deng and his daughter. Any good girl in the place of my client would choose Mualana's house over Bit al-Zabir's brothel. Bit al-Zabir threatened Ian before she sent her to Mualana's residence. She told her that gangsters would be sent to keep watch over the house, and if she made an attempt to escape, then those evil men would catch her and bring her back to Bit al-Zabir's prostitution and slavery camp. Mr. Akal ceased his monologue, glared at Bit al-Zabir. Before he could make an unpleasant remark, or carry out the punishment, which he thought she was worthy of, the judge intervened. Please, Mr. Akal, remember what I told you a few minutes ago. No rude comments or remarks are allowed in this court. You tell us what your client told you, and leave it to the court to decide. I seek refuge in Allah from the accursed devil, said Mr. Akal, raising imploring hands. The judge did not know whether to consider that as prayer, a remark, or a curse on the accused. For that reason he made the statement, "O Allah, add more days to my soul," before falling silent again himself. Mr. Akal continued, my client was trapped inside Mualana's house. She had no home or family left in Sudan. If she ran from the devil's house and went to the concentration camp in Babanosa, we all know what would have happened to her. The judge once again could not understand the phrase, the devil's house, therefore he offered another prayer for patience. There is no objection on your judgment, O Allah, and please, Mr. Akal, speed up your defense and try to be brief. I have finished my defense, said Mr. Akal quickly. He added only his advice to the court. I request this court to pass severe punishment on the accursed Mu'allana Abdul Razik, and on the former prostitute-turned-women trader, Bint al-Zubayr. Before the judge would disqualify him or remove him from the courtroom, Mr. Akal reached his seat one long stride and sat down. Is there anything the accused lawyer wants to say to the court? The length of this case was taking its toll on the judge. He was weary of the whole thing and wants to be done with it. Yes, Your Honor, said Mu'allana's lawyer while seated. Whatever Mr. Akal has narrated to the court has nothing to do with my client. My client, the blessed Imam Sheikh Abdul Razik, is innocent of responsibility for the crime that was committed against Ikhlas, as the wolf was innocent of the blood of Joseph. The court will decide on that, and not you, said the judge. Then, the judge turned to one of his jurymen and whispered some words in his ear. Before he could convey the same words to the other juryman, he heard someone shouting at him. I have something to say, Your Honor, the judge, shouted Malwal, who was back on his feet. The judge was astonished at his boldness and did not know whether to tell him say it, or to keep quiet. There is one more culprit in this conspiracy against my wife, Ayan, who should be brought to justice, and punished for his crime. Who is that person? Asked the judge, being more interested than others. Malwal answered gladly, Hajrodwan. He was the one who raided the village of my bride Ayan, killed her family members and other villagers, stole the women and the cattle, and brought them to the place from which Wad Mira forcibly took them from him. How did you know that? The judge felt something else big about to happen. My wife Olivia and I had chased him from another village recently and caught one of his men, who told us his name. If the court does not believe us, let my wife, Ikhlas, see and identify him for the court. The judge was not surprised that Malwal claimed to have 2 wives, for he himself had 3. But he was very much interested in the new development of the case. He took his gavel, announced the pending arrest of Hajrodwan, and considered the trial suspended until the next hearing. He then hammered on his table and shouted, Court! The arrest and the involvement of Hajrodwan in Mu'allana's case created a great sensation in the city, and the news spread far and wide, until it reached beyond the borders of Sudan, into Chad. He was arrested under the serious charges of raid, murder, rape, and slavery. Mu'allana's crime began to appear as nothing compared to those hideous crimes committed by the wealthy man, Hajrodwan, and the infamous woman, Bint al-Zubayr Basha. This time, the court scheduled its hearing on a public holiday, and booked the largest hall in the city for the trial. Surprisingly, slavery did not become a serious issue for the court, until Hajrodwan was dragged into it. Before that, the public looked at the crime of Mu'allana as simply being exploitation of a southern girl. As a matter of fact, what Mu'allana did to Ikhlas was a common practice in Sudan. For example, the Eritrean refugee girls in the eastern region of Sudan and Khartoum faced more serious harassment and abuse than what Ikhlas had faced in Mu'allana's house. What made Mu'allana's case a bit more serious was his appeal to the religious authorities to justify his claim to slavery. Hajrodwan's case was immediately considered serious, because he traded human beings as one would trade with material goods. In the olden days, the Janjaweed used to raid the southern villages, captured women and children, and bring them to work in their homes and fields and to shepherd their cattle without pay. The story of Hajrodwan was colored and changed as it passed from one mouth to another. By the time the date of his trial arrived, a couple of weeks later, his case had developed into an interesting story. He was believed to have accumulated all his wealth through slave trade. Every year he went with his Mujahideen fighters to the south, and captured thousands of young Christian women and brought them to the western region to sell to rich people. Due to their unusual beauty, Ikhlas was sold to Mu'allana, Olivia to Bint al-Zubayr, and Ayan to an unknown person. The trial grew in size to include not only Malwal's former bride, but also 2 other beautiful girls. On the appointed day, many young men came to court to see the 3 beauties, Ikhlas, Ayan, Olivia. The populace thought that Ikhlas and Ayan were two different kidnapped girls. In the 2 weeks prior to Haj Rodwan's trial, Malwal, Ayan, and Olivia had to deal with their own serious dilemma. On the day Malwal found his missing bride, he followed Mr. Akal and Ikhlas out of the courtroom with tear-filled eyes and a bleeding heart. In front of Mr. Akal, Ayan fell on her knees and cried like a child when she recognized her husband, Malwal. She thanked heaven and earth for having mercy on her and bringing her husband all the way from America to rescue her from the jaws of the lions. When Ayan recognized her husband, then, and only then, Malwal began to think of the unavoidable consequences. He could not imagine for a even moment separating himself from his beloved Olivia, who became by then had come to mean everything to him. At the same time, his marriage vows and his commitment to his family and society, would not allow him to forsake Ayan after he found her. Wherefore, he found himself in a serious dilemma that he could not solve by himself. It was Olivia who brought up the topic at the hotel, when the two lovers returned from Mr. Akal's house. "I know what is bothering you, Malwal," said Olivia sadly. Malwal did not respond to her statement. "I have been troubled by it, from the time you had identified your missing bride. I have already thought of a solution." "Never think of leaving me, or imagine that I am ever going to leave you," shouted Malwal. Olivia put her hand on Malwal's shoulder. "I know, Malwal, you love me, and I love you too. But your duty as a good husband requires you to take Ayan, and return to your country. She has no one to look after her, if you leave her. As for me, I have parents and a home in the south. I have education, experience, and a good profession. I can take care of myself, but Ayan has none of these." Malwal's face crumpled, and he answered, "Whatever you have said may look right, but still, I can't leave you. I love you so much." He added in a softer whisper, "And I do not love Ayan." That night, Olivia and Malwal did not sleep and continued to debate their dilemma until the morning. At the end of their discussion, after thousands of words had been exchanged and flood of tears had been wept, Olivia was able to convince Malwal to leave her and go with his wife, Ayan. When Malwal finally accepted the hard choice, Olivia moved out of their shared bed. She argued that their separation should begin immediately. Malwal rejected such an instant separation and preferred gradual severing of their intimate souls. First, they should separate beds, then rooms, houses, and finally, they should live in two separate countries. As soon as she convinced Malwal, Olivia approached Ayan and pleaded with her to stay with her husband. Ayan also showed some resistance, and innocently suggested that the two of them should share Malwal, as Muslim women do. Such an idea was rejected strongly by Olivia, and she insisted that Ayan and Malwal should live together as husband and wife. When the new arrangement was finally forced on Malwal, Olivia sent him to stay with his wife in Mr. Akal's residence. It was one day before the trial that Ayan and Malwal spent their first wedding night together. It was a wonderful night for Ayan, but Malwal felt as if his soul was split into two halves, one remained with Olivia, and the other was united with Ikhlas. It was difficult to describe the pain that Olivia went through during her first night without Malwal. The next morning, before they went to court, Malwal called the Sudanese pastor and the president of the association in the United States of America, and broke the good news. He promised to come home soon, to the USA, along with his bride, Ayan. He did not reveal details to them on the phone about how and where he found his missing bride.